What if Space Marines vanished forever in Warhammer 40,000? What if the Emperor's greatest warriors, the Space Marines, disappeared overnight? Gone. No more angels of death to protect humanity from the galaxy's endless horrors. Could the Imperium survive such a cataclysmic loss? Or would the enemies of mankind finally succeed in breaking the Imperium's fragile shell? Without the Space Marines, the Imperium loses more than just its fiercest warriors. These superhumans aren't just soldiers. They are symbols of the Emperor's will, the foundation of humanity's belief in victory. For 10,000 years, they've been the stalwart defenders against Xenos and chaos, standing as the last line of defense between humanity and annihilation. But what happens when that line disappears? What if the Imperial Guard, the very soldiers that have always fought in the shadow of the Space Marines, had to become the first line of defense? Could they rise to the occasion, or would they falter under the weight of a galaxy full of predators? The mighty Guard, trained to hold the line, might now be the Imperium's only hope. But they're mortal, no gene seed, no power armor, just humans with rifles. Can they truly stand up to the horrors of the galaxy alone? Imagine the Mechanicus, those masters of technology but not warriors, suddenly thrust into the role of the Imperium's defense. They've spent millennia working on the Emperor's machines, but would they be able to step into the void left by the Space Marines? Could the cold logic of the Mechanicus replace the indomitable will of a superhuman soldier? Or would they be crushed under the pressure of defending the Imperium against forces far beyond their control? Now, with the Space Marines gone, the Tyranids' chaos, and the Necrons would see an open door. A chance to sweep through the Imperium like locusts, consuming everything in their path. These galactic horrors, once repelled by the might of the Space Marines, would now find the Imperium a much easier target. The question is, could humanity withstand this tidal wave of destruction? What would it feel like for an average citizen of the Imperium to watch the fall of their greatest protectors? To witness the end of an era and the collapse of the myth they had clung to for centuries, the myth of invincibility, of the Emperor's eternal guardians. The loss would not just be military, it would be spiritual. Could they maintain their faith in the Emperor when the symbol of his power, the Space Marines, was no longer there? And what about the leadership? Could the remaining forces of the Imperium, those who never fought on the front lines, truly fill the void? Could the Imperium adapt fast enough, or would it crumble, fractured by doubt and fear? It's one thing to manage a galaxy-wide empire, but quite another to defend it from extinction. Here's the crux of it all. Could humanity truly endure without its superhuman warriors? If the Space Marines were gone forever, the Imperium would be forced to evolve. There's no choice but to adapt. Could the Imperium survive the loss of its angels, or would the galaxy fall into darkness once and for all? Could humanity adapt in time, or would the stars burn in darkness? The loss of the Space Marines would be more than just a military disaster. It would be a test of humanity's core. It's not about warriors anymore. It's about the people who would be left to stand against the galaxy's horrors. Will humanity rise, or will it be consumed by the very darkness it once feared? Without the Space Marines, the galaxy would begin to tremble. The Emperor's finest warriors gone. The sudden void they leave behind isn't just strategic, it's existential. Humanity, so long protected by these superhuman soldiers, would now find itself alone, struggling to hold on to its very survival. But what would the Imperium do next? Could the Imperial Guard, once a support force, become the first and only line of defense? With no Space Marines to lead them, the mortal soldiers of the Guard would need to step up in ways they never had before. But the enemy knows no mercy. Tyranids, chaos, and Necrons are already waiting for their moment. And if the Guard can't hold the line, who will? What if the Mechanicus, the very tech masters of the Imperium, desperate for a solution, started experimenting with terrifying new technologies? Could their creations go horribly wrong, turning their attempt to save humanity into a new kind of terror? Or could they make something that is even stronger, even deadlier than the Space Marines themselves? The Adeptus Mechanicus would have to answer the call, but it wouldn't be easy. These are not warriors. They are crafters of weapons and machines. But in the absence of the angels of death, could they become something else? What if, in their desperation, they tried to create a new breed of warrior, using ancient technologies to enhance humans into monstrous, biomechanical horrors? Could the Mechanicus creations replace the Space Marines, or would they only add to the chaos? But it's not just the Mechanicus who would shift in this new world. The Inquisition, long the shadowy arm of the Emperor's will, would find its role changing too. With no superhumans to enforce the Emperor's will, would the Inquisitors gain more power, tightening their grip on the Imperium's fractured structure? Could they become more dangerous than the very Xenos and Chaos forces they were meant to fight? What if the Inquisition's increased control over the Imperium became a threat in itself, one that began to suffocate the Imperium rather than protect it? As these factions struggle to adapt, there's an even darker question that looms. Could the Imperium fracture into chaos, giving rise to a new faction, or would the galaxy descend into lawlessness? The loss of the Space Marines would cause uncertainty on every level, militarily, politically, and socially. Could the Emperor's dream of a united Imperium still survive, or would it crumble into competing factions, each trying to control what's left of humanity? As panic begins to rise within the heart of the Imperium, how long before the enemies of mankind take full advantage? Already, chaos warbands would start to swarm the outer edges of the Imperium. Tyranid fleets, sensing weakness, would turn their eyes toward imperial worlds, ready to consume. Meanwhile, the Necrons, silent, calculating, deadly, would awaken in unprecedented numbers. This is no longer a matter of defending against threats. This is a race against time. Could humanity mount a defense in time? And this isn't just a military issue. The loss of the Space Marines would strike at the heart of the Imperium's faith. Without the Angels of Death, the people of the Imperium would begin to question the Emperor's will. What would the average citizen feel as they saw their divine protectors, once invincible, fall before their very eyes? Could the Imperium's faith hold, or would it begin to erode under the weight of doubt? Would the ecclesiarchy be able to maintain its grip on the people, or would a crisis of faith tear the Imperium apart from within? Amid all this, we can't forget the personal stories. The leaders of the Imperium, the soldiers, who would be forced to rise to meet the challenges. What would it feel like for a general in the Imperial Guard, watching his forces falter, knowing that the enemy is closing in and there are no reinforcements coming? Could he overcome the fear of fighting without the Space Marines, or would he crumble under the weight of impossible decisions? And what about the Inquisitors? Could they truly remain loyal to the Emperor's vision, or would they fall into their own madness, believing they must do anything, even heresy, to save the Imperium? How long before their tactics, their secrecy, and their manipulations become as much of a threat to humanity as the chaos forces themselves? This is a critical turning point for humanity. What would it take to survive in a galaxy without the Space Marines? Would humanity's grit and resilience be enough to overcome the ever-growing threats? Or would they, too, fall to the encroaching darkness that now knows no boundaries? The stakes are higher than ever, and as the Imperium grapples with the loss of its greatest warriors, we're left to ask, could the Imperium truly survive without the Angels of Death? Could humanity face the void and fight back, or would the galaxy collapse under its weight? Only time will tell if the Imperium can hold, or if it will shatter into the chaos it has fought so long to avoid. As the Imperium reels from the loss of the Space Marines, the galaxy begins to change in ways no one could have predicted. The darkness that once feared the Emperor's angels now sees an opportunity, a crack in humanity's once impenetrable shield. What happens when the galaxy's worst threats realize that humanity is no longer protected by its superhuman defenders? How long before these enemies, once held at bay, finally strike with all their might? The Tyranids, a never-ending swarm driven by hunger and instinct, would be the first to test humanity's resolve. They've always been relentless, but now there would be no Space Marines to hold back their endless tides. What if the Tyranids, sensing the absence of the Space Marines, turned their hunger toward imperial worlds with unparalleled ferocity? The hive fleets would begin to spread across the galaxy, consuming everything in their path. Entire systems would fall, their populations wiped out, their worlds reduced to barren husks. Could the Imperial Guard, even with its vast numbers, hold back the swarm? Or would humanity's last stand be overrun by wave after wave of alien horror? Meanwhile, the forces of chaos, long waiting for a sign of weakness, would waste no time in exploiting the Imperium's vulnerability. What if chaos, now unchallenged by the mighty Astartes, descended upon the heart of humanity's empire? The gods of chaos would be thrilled, seeing an opportunity to destroy the very foundations of the Imperium from within. The traitor legions, emboldened by the lack of their old enemies, would rampage across the stars, sowing destruction in every sector they touch. Could the Imperium ever find a way to repel them, or would the forces of chaos tear the Imperium apart from within? What if they succeeded in corrupting what little remained of the imperial forces? Would the once noble warriors of the Astra Militarum fall, their souls claimed by the dark powers they once fought against? And while these two factions would create chaos in the galaxy, the Necrons, the ancient cold machines, would not sit idly by. Once thought dormant, these Xenos would awaken from their slumber and see the Imperium's crisis as an opportunity. What if the Necrons, realizing the Emperor's greatest weapons are gone, decided to push forward with their plans of galactic domination? The Imperium's great bastions would become easy targets, their defenses faltering without the Space Marines. Entire fleets of Necron ships, glowing with dark energy, would descend upon Imperial systems, erasing any resistance with brutal efficiency. Could the Imperium's mortal forces even scratch the surface of these ancient enemies? Would humanity be able to muster a defense against an opponent whose very existence seems beyond the reach of conventional warfare? At the same time, the people of the Imperium would be forced to reckon with the most terrifying consequence of all: the collapse of faith. The ecclesiarchy, once a pillar of the Imperium's belief, would find itself scrambling to maintain control over a population that had lost its most potent symbol of the Emperor's will. The Space Marines were more than just warriors. They were the living embodiment of the Emperor's divine power. Without them, would the people begin to question everything they've been taught? Could the ecclesiarchy's attempts to rewrite the imperial creed, to justify the absence of the Space Marines as part of a divine plan, hold the Imperium together? Or would the masses, seeing their heroes fall, begin to doubt not only the Emperor's power but his very existence? What if the people of the Imperium began to fracture themselves? What if entire sectors, once loyal to the Emperor, now turned against the crumbling empire? As faith dissolves, could the Imperium fragment into factions, each interpreting the Emperor's will in their own way? Could a new faction rise in the wake of the Imperium's destruction, seizing power and tearing apart what was once united? Without the Space Marines as the unifying force, humanity could fall into a dark age of chaos, each faction fighting for control over the remnants of the Imperium. Would the forces of order within the Imperium be able to maintain control, or would the galaxy descend into anarchy, with only the strongest factions surviving? As these galactic threats move in on the Imperium, the leadership would be forced to take drastic steps. The Imperial Guard would need to mobilize every available soldier. But how could they manage the vast scope of the Imperium's enemies without the aid of the Space Marines? Would the leaders of the Imperium, generals, governors, and even the Inquisition, be able to make the hard decisions necessary to prevent the complete collapse of their empire? What would the Inquisitors do when faced with the knowledge that their emperor's greatest creation, the Space Marines, are gone forever? Would they become desperate, willing to sacrifice anything, even the soul of the Imperium itself, in order to preserve what little is left? It's at this moment that the true test begins. Humanity's survival hinges on more than just tactics and firepower. It's a battle for the very soul of the Imperium. Could humanity's resilience, its ability to endure hardship and rise from the ashes, be enough to overcome the horrors of the galaxy? Or would humanity be left to drown in the darkness, its empire crumbling under the weight of its failures? The future of the Imperium, and indeed humanity itself, is on the edge of a knife. Can the Imperium adapt to its new reality, or will it fall beneath the weight of its enemies? And if it does fall, who will rise to take its place? Will anyone dare to fight back, or is humanity truly doomed to be consumed by the darkness that now surrounds it? As the Imperium faces the harsh reality of a galaxy without the Space Marines, every corner of the Empire begins to unravel. Once, humanity was bound together by the might of these superhuman warriors, the Emperor's finest. But now, with their sudden disappearance, what happens when the very foundation of the Imperium begins to crack? How long before the galaxy's enemies scent blood in the water, and humanity finds itself cornered? The Imperial Guard, usually seen as the hammer to the Space Marine's scalpel, would now become the first line of defense. But here's the issue. These are mortal men and women, armed with little more than guns and the courage to face down the horrors of the galaxy. Can the Guard really stand up to the monsters of the universe without the support of their superhuman brethren? Could they hold the line, or would they be crushed under the weight of their enemies? Let's not forget the Adeptus Mechanicus, once the Emperor's servants in all things technological. Now the Mechanicus would find themselves at the center of a desperate attempt to fill the void. What if their desperation leads them down a darker path, the creation of horrific biomechanical monstrosities? Imagine the technology and resources of the Mechanicus, working tirelessly to replace the Space Marines. Could their creations become the Imperium's new hope, or would they result in terrible abominations? What if they unwittingly opened a door to a new nightmare? Meanwhile, the Inquisition would be pushed into an uncomfortable position. Once the enforcers of the Emperor's will, they now have no direct power to back up their decrees. Could the Inquisition's control over the Imperium become more dangerous than the chaos forces they once fought? They would begin to tighten their grip on the Imperium, using any means necessary to maintain order. But in this new age, could their methods become a double-edged sword, protecting the Imperium from internal strife, but crushing the last vestiges of freedom within it? And then there's the ecclesiarchy. The death of the Space Marines would strike directly at the heart of the Imperium's faith. These warriors were the living embodiment of the Emperor's will, and their loss would raise profound questions. Could the people of the Imperium continue to worship a god who no longer has his chosen angels to fight his battles? Without the Space Marines, the ecclesiarchy would be forced to find a new way to explain the Emperor's silence. But what if the truth of the Imperium's fragility began to spread, sparking rebellion among the masses? What if people stopped believing in the Emperor's divinity? The very faith that holds the Imperium together could fracture, leaving humanity exposed to greater threats than ever before. The Tyranids, the never-ending swarm of predatory Xenos, would be among the first to act. No longer restrained by the Emperor's champions, they would come for the Imperium in waves, intent on consuming every last human life they can find. Could the Imperium's remaining forces, even the combined might of the Guard and Navy, stand against the Tyranid's endless hunger? Or would the galaxy be stripped bare, one world at a time? But the Tyranids wouldn't be alone. The forces of chaos, sensing the perfect opportunity to strike, would unleash their full might upon the Imperium. What if chaos found the Imperium vulnerable, without its legendary warriors to lead the charge? The forces of the dark gods would storm across the galaxy, and without the Space Marines to fight them, the Imperium's mortal forces would be powerless to resist. Could humanity push back against the overwhelming corruption of chaos? Or would the Imperium fall to the very madness it fought so hard to suppress? And then there are the Necrons, the ancient, cold machines that have waited in the shadows for millennia. What if the Necrons saw the disappearance of the Space Marines as a signal to finally make their move? The galaxy's ancient predators would rise from their tombs, and the Imperium's weakened forces would be unable to defend against them. Could humanity face the cold, calculating might of the Necrons, or would they be swept away by the tide of ancient destruction? Amid this chaos, the leadership of the Imperium would have to make impossible decisions. What if the last general of the Imperial Guard, seeing the wave of destruction heading for his forces, was forced to choose between retreating to fight another day or standing firm and risking it all. These leaders, once used to following the Space Marines' lead, would now have to take command of an empire on the verge of collapse. How could they rally the people to fight when everything they believed in is falling apart? The citizens of the Imperium would be facing their own crisis. Could they survive without their superhuman defenders? What would it feel like to live in a galaxy where the Emperor's angels were no longer there to protect you? Would they give in to fear and chaos, or would they rise up and fight for the future of humanity? Could ordinary men and women step into the breach, taking the place of the Space Marines, or would they crumble under the pressure? And as the enemies of mankind close in, the Imperium would be forced to confront an undeniable truth. Without the Space Marines, the Imperium's survival hinges on its will to fight, to adapt, and to evolve. Could humanity find new strength in the face of certain annihilation? Or would the darkness prove too much to overcome, leaving the galaxy in ruins? Can humanity rise from the ashes, or will the Imperium fall? The loss of the Space Marines has set in motion a chain of events that could unravel everything the Imperium has fought to protect. What would the future look like without the Emperor's finest warriors? Could humanity survive, or is the galaxy doomed to fall into the void forever? As the Imperium staggers under the weight of its greatest loss, the extinction of the Space Marines, it becomes painfully clear that the universe is watching. What if the galaxy's darkest corners, once held in check by the Emperor's finest warriors, now saw their chance to strike? Without the angels of death, who would stand between humanity and the unstoppable forces gathering at the edge of the Imperium? The answer to this question would not come from the superhumans humanity once relied on, but from the very people who once stood in their shadows. Ordinary humans, the soldiers, the leaders, and the survivors. The Astra Militarum, the Imperial Guard, would be the first to feel the brutal consequences of this loss. Thousands of soldiers who once fought beside the Space Marines now stand alone. Can the Guard, with its mortal soldiers, hold back the chaos, xenos, and horrors that now flood the galaxy? Without the Space Marines to lead the charge, they must shoulder the full responsibility of defending the Imperium's borders. Yet the gap between them and their superhuman counterparts is wide. The Guard has courage, numbers, and tactical expertise, but against the likes of the Tyranids, Chaos, and the Necrons, could they do anything more than slow the inevitable? What if, instead of overwhelming victory, the Guard's heroism became their own tragic undoing, their sacrifice unable to prevent the relentless march of destruction? And as humanity faces the darkness, something unexpected begins to stir. What if the Mechanicus, in its desperation to compensate for the loss of the Space Marines, began creating something darker, something worse. With no more space marines to defend the Imperium, the Adeptus Mechanicus, known for their knowledge of ancient technology and experimentation, would turn their gaze toward creating new soldiers. What if their desperation led to the creation of horrific biomechanical horrors, creatures unlike anything the Imperium has seen before? Could their need for solutions turn into a new kind of terror, one that would haunt the galaxy for generations to come? Or could the Mechanicus succeed, producing soldiers capable of stepping into the very shoes of the Space Marines? Meanwhile, the Inquisition would continue to enforce the Emperor's will, but with no Space Marines to back up their authority, their power would only grow more dangerous. What if the Inquisition, seizing the opportunity, expanded its control over the Imperium, becoming an even darker force that threatened the very heart of humanity's freedom? With no one to challenge them, could they become a new type of threat, wielding influence in the shadows? Would they sacrifice more lives in the name of survival, becoming a force more sinister than the very enemies they once fought? As the Imperium struggles to adapt, its faith is tested like never before. Without the Space Marines to inspire awe and belief, the people of the Imperium would start questioning everything. What if the Imperium's faith in the Emperor began to crumble as the angels of death, once revered as his divine messengers, are no more? The ecclesiarchy, desperately trying to preserve the belief in the Emperor's power, would be forced to adapt. Could they reframe the Space Marines' disappearance as part of the Emperor's greater plan? Or would their failure to provide answers spark rebellion, heresy, and doubt among the faithful? What if the people, seeing no divine intervention, turned their backs on their once unstoppable faith, plunging the Imperium into a crisis of belief? As the Imperium's enemies grow bolder, the question remains: could humanity survive on its own? The loss of the Space Marines would push humanity to its breaking point. The Imperium, now weakened, would be forced to rely on the unlikeliest of heroes, its mortal soldiers and leaders. What if these humans, ordinary and fallible, rose to the occasion? Could they rise up, not in the shadow of the Space Marines, but in their own light, to save the Imperium from destruction? The greatest challenge would not be the external forces pressing in on humanity's borders. It would be the internal collapse. The Imperium would be forced to ask itself, what is the Emperor's will when his chosen warriors are no more? Would humanity fall into darkness, its light extinguished forever? Or could the people of the Imperium find a new path forward, one forged not by superhumans, but by the will of every individual who calls humanity home? As humanity stands on the edge, facing the greatest test of its existence, one question remains: could humanity survive without its superhuman protectors? Or is this the beginning of the end for the Imperium of Man? With enemies circling, faith faltering, and leadership fractured, only time will tell if humanity can hold the line, or if the galaxy will finally fall to the dark forces waiting to claim it.